Hello, everyone, and welcome to Facebook Live with the Horticulturists. We are here to answer your gardening questions and talk about what's happening in our gardens here in Illinois. My name is Candice Hart. I'm the Illinois State Master Gardener Specialist, and I live in Bloomington, so I'm located in central Illinois here. And my specialty, I would say, is flowers, annuals, perennials, cut flowers, all of that type of stuff. But I've got my colleague Ryan here, who has a much different specialty than I.
Yeah, I'm Ryan Pankau. I'm the horticulture educator right here out of Champaign, and my specialty is trees and shrubs, and maybe a secondary one would be vegetable gardening. I'm a big vegetable gardener, so those are the things I like to talk about and have growing in my garden. So.
Awesome. Well, if you guys have any gardening questions, feel free to add them into the comment box there, and we'll get all of those answered today. We brought a couple topics that we wanted to talk about ahead of time while we wait for questions to come in. So, the one that I brought with me today are the perennial plants of the year. So, if you've never heard of that, I just got back from the Perennial Plant Association conference, which happens every year. They move it across the state, and this year was actually in Chicago, so very easy to get to. And so the members of the Perennial Plant Association, who are mostly growers, they grow perennials for garden centers, or they own garden centers, or they're educators like myself. They all vote on a perennial that will be the perennial of the year, and then of course they market it and get people to buy it because it's an awesome perennial. Mm-hmm. So for 2019, so for the current year, the perennial of the year is Stachys Hummelo, which I brought some with me today. It's a great, if you're familiar with Stachys, you might be familiar with lamb's ear. So lamb's ear is in the genus Stachys. This doesn't look like lamb's ear at all, even though they're in the same.
Fuzzy.
Yeah, it doesn't have that silver fuzzy like foliage that lamb's ear does. But it's a fairly kind of low growing perennial. It kind of fills in air. It's not aggressive, but it does kind of get kind of a bigger mound of just kind of nice green foliage like this. And then we've got some pictures where you can see then the pink, kind of bright pink flowers then kind of stick up above the
really beautiful flowers.
Foliage. Yeah, I love the color of the flowers, and they can get some kind of good height to them, so they can kind of be a good cut flower too, which of course I always like. So nice bright colored flowers. So that's the current year. That's the 2019.
And then when does it flower?
So it flowers in the summer, to be kind of earlier summer.
Okay.
So this one I just picked up at the garden center, so obviously it just has foliage on it. But yeah, I'll get this in the ground, and then next year I'll have some nice flowers coming on. Yeah. So that's 2019 perennial plant. There is Stachys, and the cultivar is called Hummelo. 2020, which was just announced at the conference, is the Aralia Sun King. And I checked the garden center this morning. They didn't have the exact Aralia that I wanted, but this is going to look very similar to what Aralia Sun King will look like. It has this very cool lime green, really bright foliage. And what's awesome about it is that it's a shade plant. Because, we're always looking for fun perennials for the shade. That's not like a hosta or something else. And this guy gets big. Okay, so this particular cultivar is not Sun King. It is called Gotemba, which I haven't tried this one yet. This guy gets like 5 to 8 feet tall in one season. So that's huge. But you can see the photos of Sun King there. It only gets about 4 feet or so, which is a little bit more manageable.
Yeah, a
little bit more manageable. But just really great one to add into your shade garden because it holds that lime green color all season long, and it gives you a lot of size. So if you got a space to fill, you don't want to do the traditional kind of big hostas, you can try one of these Aralias.
Yeah, and I'm always looking for larger shade gardening plants.
Yeah, because a lot of times it's smaller, more delicate kind of things, and it's a good color too, which is fun.
Yeah, it's an interesting color.
Yeah. So check those out. 2019 perennial of the year is Stachys Hummelo. 2020 is the Aralia Sun King. So I imagine now that it's been announced, you'll start to see it popping up more in garden centers because a lot of times they'll try to have what's going on that year. So
tends to show up once it's nominated.
Exactly. Yeah, and I'm excited to see what will be next year. It's always the great thing about it is that the members of the association are from everywhere. They're from all around the country. So usually, like if it's voted on people from many different locations, it usually means it's pretty solid option. If it works for a lot of people, then it's usually
so it's really kind of crowdsourced the voting. It's not industry driven or anything like that. So kind of an unbiased voting for these beautiful plants.
It's nice. Yeah, definitely. Cool. Well, if you guys have gardening questions, add them to the comment box. It looks like we have a couple coming in here. Maddie asked Sun King, like the Beatles song. Yeah, I guess that's one way. That's one way to remember it, Maddie. Definitely, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, and Amy asked how to spell Aralia. So it's spelled Aralia. Aralia, and then the cultivar is called Sun King. So we'll add it to the comment box there. Look at it at your local garden center.
Yeah, great shade plant.
Definitely.
For sure.
And then a question here from Victoria. How would you prune it for shaping once it's filled the space? And I think you're talking about Sun King here, I think, Victoria. So you could definitely keep this pruned if you didn't want it to get 5 to 8 feet tall. You could definitely come in here and just pinch it back. So you can see this one here kind of has some taller growth coming out here. And if I wanted to keep it more compact, I could just come in with a pair of pruners and just kind of continually kind of pinch it back a little bit.
And at the node.
At the node, yep. So go back to like where another leaf is starting and then prune it out. And that could keep it kind of a more smaller, manageable size.
That's a pretty easy way to do it too. When you find kind of this longest one and trace it all the way back down into the center of the plant and cut the whole thing off.
Yeah. And what's nice is that it's an herbaceous perennial. So it's not a shrub, it's not a tree, it doesn't have woody growth on it. So every year it's going to die back to the ground. So all of that 5 to 8 foot growth comes in one season. So you're not having to deal with big thick branches or anything, so it would be easy to pinch off
or just use hand pruners. I mean, I use hand pruners on a lot of herbaceous stuff just for the ease of cutting it.
For sure.
Making a clean cut, that's always nice to do.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome. Well, great questions. Definitely try some of these out if you don't have them in your garden already. And you can always go to the Perennial Plant Association page, too. I think they started this program in the early 90s, if I remember right. So you can look back and see like what all the other winners are. You probably have some of them in your garden already because they're usually pretty solid choices.
Yeah, and a great list of plants, too.
Yeah, exactly.
Wouldn't be the winner if it wasn't a great plant.
Exactly. If you don't know where to start, check out some of those. Yeah. Awesome. Okay, well, what did you want to talk about today, Ryan?
I had a couple different tree insects, actually 3 different tree insects to maybe talk about if we have time.
Yeah, let's do it.
The first of which is a gall that's common on hackberry. So I think all of us, if you've paid attention to your hackberry trees, you probably noticed those little bumps on the leaves. They usually get them every year. Kind of varies tree to tree, how many bumps you have on your leaves, but those are actually a gall caused by an insect. And it's aptly named the hackberry nipple gall. It looks like a little tiny nipple on each of those leaves, and I think when you see a picture of it, you'll recognize it. Yeah. And some leaves will have a dozen of those on the same leaf, and some hackberry trees won't have it, some will. I mean, it kind of varies year to year on what trees are infected, but we get a lot of questions about that this time of year.
Yeah.
In our office and other places and folks we talk with. And really, although it does look kind of unsightly, those bumpy, weird bumps on leaves really doesn't hurt the tree in any way.
Yeah,
so
that's good.
It's not really something that we'd normally treat for or try and spray for. Actually, those little bumps you see are a response from the plant. The insect lays, it's a psyllid, is what you would call this type of insect. Lays a little egg in the emerging leaves early in the season. When that egg hatches and the larva starts to feed, that egg grows this gall, or the leaf grows this gall around.
Cool. It's really cool.
Which is really neat.
Yeah, because
it protects that little larva all summer while it feeds on the sap of the leaf. Yeah. And really, the amount of sap it takes out of the plant is really a negligible effect.
Yeah, you're not going to kill a tree.
No, it's not a big deal.
Yeah.
And so then they emerge later in the year and do their thing, reproduce. And then they overwinter in cracks in the bark. A lot of folks see them on their window screens and things. They're little tiny flying insects. So they're really, even in their adult stage, they're not a pesky pest.
Yeah, they're not.
So yeah, we get a lot of questions and just not something we really ever treat much. It's just kind of part of nature. It's a native insect, and that's just part of the ecosystem we live in here in Illinois.
Pretty cool. I kind of use it as an identification feature, honestly, sometimes. Because if you see those on the leaf and you look at kind of what the shape of the leaf is, and you're like, oh, yeah, that's a hackberry.
That's a hackberry.
Can't be anything else. So
yeah,
that's cool. And there's other type of galls that you might see on trees this time of year, too. Have we gotten any other questions lately about other galls?
We always get a lot of questions about the oak galls.
Yeah.
There's galls that are on oaks. Shingle oak is probably the worst. Maybe pin oak is the second worst. They're in the red oak family, but it's kind of the same story with those galls.
Yeah.
We really don't have a super effective treatment for them is one thing, and they really are kind of negligible in what they take away from tree health. Now, in the case of a shingle oak that has just a ton of those galls all throughout its canopy, it's usually some other health issue that's indicating for us. Okay. So it's not really the gall that we would treat, but we'd be looking at
what's
there
causing
a soil issue? Was there some soil disturbance? Is the tree just really stressed because of the situation? It's the site that it's on. Yeah. So that's probably the second most common gall.
Yeah, I hear a lot of oak questions too, because you'll come up to your tree and you'll just see these weird growths. They almost look like tumors on the leaves or on the branches or small stems.
Yeah, they're on the twigs of oaks. And they can actually cause a little bit of twig dieback, beyond where the gall is. But a lot of times you'll see that branch still fully functioning and alive with the gall right there in the twig. So
that's good.
So
I think they're kind of cool, really.
Yeah. Well, unless you have a lot.
Interesting feature. Yeah, if you have a lot, then you might be concerned. But
it's really when folks have a ton of them that we get the questions usually. And again, it's probably some other tree health issue, not really the gall. Yeah. The gall is kind of the indicator of some other issue in that case.
Cool. Very cool.
So the other one I was going to talk about quickly, if we don't have too many questions piling up.
Keep those questions coming into the comments there, everybody.
Are bagworms. And those are really noticeable this time of year. So we have a few pictures, and I think we even have a little video to run of bagworm in action. But we get a lot of calls, a lot of concerned folks this time of year, because this is the point in the season where those bags are getting rather large. Those insects are getting pretty good size. The galls you see in those pictures are 2-3 inches long.
Yeah, they're pretty big.
And pretty noticeable. It's another one that if you don't have a lot of them, it's really not a big issue for the tree. Now, there are cases where on arborvitae in particular, I think that's one I've seen it pretty bad on. It gets on bald cypress some, where it can almost look like defoliation, is starting to happen. And that's kind of in our little video here of a bagworm in action. This plant is actually looking fairly defoliated. Now, where did you see this?
Yeah, so I shared this video with you. I was in Chicago for this conference, walking along Lake Michigan, and they had this big planting of arborvitae that looked awful. I mean, it was pretty much dead because it was covered in bagworm. The amount was just very, very large, obviously.
So pretty noticeable.
Yeah, pretty noticeable. Yeah, exactly.
And so the issue with bagworm is at this point of the season, they are so well protected in that little bag that they're really hard to treat or do much with.
Yeah, and you could see from that video, you could just see the top of them kind of right out the top of that bag, kind of chewing on stuff. So they're hard to get.
They're hard to get to. So really the treatment time for these, if you were going to spray some type of chemical to treat them, would have been way earlier, back in June. And I know that's hard to think about because now we're seeing the
now
results.
You're seeing them all.
So at this time of the year, really hand picking those off is the best recommendation we can give. And it's a little tricky if you have a tall tree.
True. Yeah, it's a little easier on like a arborvitae that's not too tall. But
and so I've talked to a lot of folks about it. I mean, there's ways you can maybe try and really safely get on a ladder to kind of hand pick them. I have a pair of telescoping hand pruners. I used to have a pair of those.
That would work well.
I used as an arborist. So we would actually, they telescoped out to, maybe 6 or 8 feet, and we could snip each one of those little bagworms off and collect them and dispose of them.
Yeah.
That's probably the best thing this time of year is just trying to hand pick them. And even if you can only reach up to your head height, you need to think about all the babies that are going to come out of each one of those bags next spring. So that's just that many fewer babies you're going to have to treat for. But again, if it's not a real bad infestation, it's maybe not something you really even need to treat to keep your tree alive. It's really those extreme cases like we saw in Candice's video.
And you'll notice because your foliage will start to turn brown. The foliage will just be disappearing because they're just eating it away. So And then obviously you'll see those bags hanging on there. So.
And those pictures that were in there I took just this week near my office here in Champaign, and it was actually, as I walked up to that row of arborvitae, I thought, there's not going to be any bagworms here.
Yeah.
And I had to actually move in a little closer to see them.
Really?
So there's times that you kind of don't notice.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you can pick them off, that's great this time of year. And if not, think about maybe next spring. It's in June time, and I think the phenology that lines up to that is the blooming of tree lilac.
Okay,
Japanese tree
gotcha.
lilac.
That's the timing.
So that's about the time that we would spray and treat. And what we're doing is getting them in their larval stage when they're crawling around and they're not in that bag yet, and applying some type of pesticide that will kill those caterpillars. So the organic version that I've used before is BT.
Sure, yeah.
So that's a soil-borne bacteria that we can spray on a tree, and when the larva ingests that, it destroys their digestive tract and essentially kills them.
So you just got to make sure to time it right, that the larvae are
time
out,
it right.
And they're gonna come in contact with it. Because what's actually kind of interesting about them is they call it ballooning. Is how these spread. So when they're small little larvae like that, they'll produce this like silken thread that will then just kind of be carried through the wind and carry them on to the next
kind of like a
over.
parachute.
So they're smart. They know they can get themselves around pretty easily.
So to recommend treatment, I would have to. If I was talking with you, I'd say if you had a bad infestation last year, that would be the time you'd think about treating next spring. If it wasn't too bad this year, maybe you wait and see. There's some natural predators of these guys, so they. Their populations go up and down like other insects. So maybe you won't have them bad next year if you didn't have them this year. So it's after a couple years of bad infestation that we kind of recommend treatment. So.
Yeah. Keep an eye out. And if you're just hopping on, we're talking about bagworms, if you've ever had those on any of your shrubs. So if you have any gardening questions, add them to the comment box here. We've got a question from Linda asking about Asian jumping worms. She said she has Asian jumping worms in her compost pile and the pile of leaves she uses for mulch. What do I do about Asian jumping worms?
So jumping worms.
So those are those invasive.
That's what I was trying to connect.
Yeah, those are those invasive ones that we don't. I think in Illinois they're slowly kind of spreading. Wisconsin has them, from what I can remember, fairly solidly, and now they're kind of working their way.
I don't know of any populations in Central Illinois, and that's.
I don't either.
But I mean, it's likely they're probably here. So where they came in is as a bait type of worm, and that's why Wisconsin is a huge fishing destination.
Makes sense.
Went there myself quite a few times.
Yeah.
And so it's just those worms that that fishermen tend to discard or to get loose, or one way or another they get into the environment. And really, the detriment of these animals is to the forest. And they rapidly consume that litter layer in the forest, and it alters that ecosystem that is the surface of the soil and the litter layer.
Yeah, it leaves a weird textured material behind once they eat through all that.
You can really see the difference in an infected woodland versus a non-infected. You would really notice a difference in the leaf cover on the ground if you entered a woodland that had that. So that's the critical thing about these, is not letting them escape into our woodlands. Now, I'm not sure what the best treatment is in your compost pile.
Don't know if you could. I mean, I suppose you could dig out that area and kind of remove the material that's in there and somehow dispose of that so that you're not just spreading the worms elsewhere.
Yeah, really in natural areas that are infected by these guys, it's really kind of for land managers just an understanding that you have that and it's going to impact the forest. We really don't have a treatment available on a wide scale to treat it on the landscape. So that's a good question of what you do with it in your compost. It may, if it's possible, if your compost heap is small enough, maybe you can spread it out really flat and remove a lot of worms by hand and try and destroy them one way or another like that. But my guess is if they're in your compost, they're probably down below. Yeah,
and my guess is there are probably other areas now in your lawn and yard as well too.
Another thing about it may be to get a positive ID on those guys.
That's true. Make sure that is actually what they are.
And if there's pretty good references on the internet that show the identification feature, and it's that little band up near the front end of a worm. It's a much lighter color. And if you really look at some pictures on the internet, you can see that difference pretty well. So that's I think there's a couple other identification features, but that was the main one that I was taught or
that's
for.
Visually. And then, of course, they're named jumping worms because when you do, like, put them in a container or put them on the ground, they do jump around. I mean, they're very mobile compared to the other worms.
Well, which is what kind of makes them a great bait worm.
Yeah,
because they attract fish with their wiggling.
Exactly.
So
Linda, unfortunately, we really don't have any good. I don't think we really have any good control methods, unfortunately. So what I would suggest is keeping an eye on them. Make sure that is what you have, and then be sure not to spread either that compost or those leaves. Don't put them in like your community landscape waste. Don't share them with another gardener. Try not to spread them to other areas is what I'm saying. Because you're going to have eggs in there. Yeah. So just kind of keep an eye out. Yeah. A lot of people are they'll get mulch delivered or they'll get compost delivered. And I think that's how most of it is spreading at this point, is in pots or in mulch and things like that.
Yeah, it definitely can spread that way pretty readily.
Yeah, so you gotta.
We humans are good at spreading invasive species.
We sure are. Yeah. Well, good question, Linda. Keep those questions coming into the comments. We'd love to answer any gardening questions you have or any thoughts on what's happening out in the garden. So I know we were talking about another disease that has popped up. So if you were on our show. Was that last month or the month before? Maybe 2 shows ago, I think.
2 shows ago.
Shows ago, we had Diane Pleva on from the plant clinic, and she was talking to us about a incidence of oak wilt, or the pathogen that causes oak wilt that was found on several rhododendrons throughout
Actually,
Illinois.
sudden oak death.
Sudden oak death, yes, or what did I say? Oak wilt.
Similar.
Yeah, sudden oak death, sorry. Luckily not found on oak, which is great so far. They've only found these on these rhododendrons that had popped up in garden centers. So we've had another alert kind of come through for something else that people could be on the lookout.
Yeah.
So you want to talk about that?
And I had a conversation about this with our extension forester from Southern Illinois, Chris Evans. And so really this is probably more of an alert for the southern part of the state. And the pathogen that is potentially present in Illinois, it's not been detected in Illinois yet, but it is in western Kentucky, is laurel wilt. And it's a pathogen that infects sassafras. That's one of our native forest trees.
Love sassafras, yeah.
Yeah, very cool native forest tree. And so it actually causes death of sassafras. And it's, like I said, it's present in western Kentucky, is as close as it's got. So this is an alert for folks in southern Illinois to watch your sassafras trees in your property. And if you're seeing symptoms, you can report that to Chris Evans. There's a good alert out there from Extension Forestry on that. The second host that is native to Illinois is spicebush. So that's an understory forest tree, actually pretty good in shade gardens, shade tolerant.
Add to the mix.
And it impacts spicebush as well. So, there's just another story of an exotic insect that's came here. So it's the red bay ambrosia beetle. Was introduced in the early 2000s way down south in Georgia. And that beetle has a fungus associated with it. So when it feeds on a host plant, it infects that plant with the fungus. And for us, it's sassafras that's impacted. For the south, it's the red bay trees that have been impacted. And I mean, it's really going to be a similar situation in emerald ash borer in the south for red bay trees, where it's going to decimate the population. They probably won't go extinct because they're still able to regenerate or produce new trees. Really serious pathogen for the south.
Wow.
And potentially really serious for Illinois for our sassafras if we get it. So something we'll need to watch over the coming years and make sure that it's not spreading statewide.
Keep an eye out. Yeah, and we've posted in the comments there a link to the alert, the fact sheet, that you can kind of read some more information about it. So if you do have sassafras trees and you live in southern Illinois, one thing to keep an eye out.
Yeah, some really good pictures in the alert of the symptoms you'll need to be looking for. So, do
you want to share a couple tips on identifying sassafras?
Sure.
If someone's not sure if they have sassafras or not.
I think the biggest identification feature on a sassafras is that some of its leaves are lobed and some are not, and it may have a leaf with no lobe whatsoever. And by lobe, I mean the lobes in a leaf.
So like indentations.
So there's no lobes on this leaf.
Yeah, it's just a solid.
But like oak trees have lobes on their leaves. So sassafras can either have a leaf with no lobe, or a leaf with one lobe, or a leaf with two lobes. So That's the first thing to look for. And the second one for me is to crush up that leaf, and it's really fragrant. It smells kind of fruity.
Fruit Loops is the way I always describe it. Yeah. I still remember in our Woody identification class learning about sassafras, and that was your go-to method. Like, crush it up, see what it smells like.
Yeah, so I mean, tree ID for me usually comes down to like those one or two things that you need to pay attention to. So that's it for me for sassafras. Is the lobed and non-lobed leaves on the same tree.
Yeah, because some of them will look kind of like a mitten shape.
Yeah,
or it'll be just a solid leaf. And mulberry is another one that we call them polymorphic leaves, where you can have different shapes of leaves. So yeah.
Yeah, and mulberry would be differentiated by its milky sap at the base of the leaf when you pull it off.
Yeah,
and it's not fragrant.
And it doesn't have that Fruit Loop smell. So
yeah.
That would be a good way to do it. Awesome, cool. We've got some info there in the comment box for you to check out on that. Something to keep an eye out for. If you have any gardening questions, add them to the comment box there. We're happy to answer them. So while we wait for some questions, why don't we talk about our gardens, kind of what's going on? So what do you got going like in your vegetable garden? What are you harvesting?
Well, tomatoes and peppers are kind of in full swing. I've got some stuff I've taken out, some greens and beets and things that I've kind of restarted. I seeded a bunch of lettuce and spinach not too long ago, along with radishes. It looks like my radishes came in really awesome.
Well, those are always that like super fast to germinate too, which is always fun. Yeah.
I think the biggest story in the garden right now is just kind of keeping it watered.
Yeah, If you're like us in Central Illinois, it's dry. Where it's pretty. I got a half-inch of rain on. Yeah, the night before last, and I was like doing a rain dance. It was like
we had a tease. I don't think Champaign-Urbana got that.
Yeah. So but you're right. Staying on top of watering is definitely the biggest thing I've been doing. Just getting the sprinklers going on those areas where I can't put a soaker hose or it's just too big of an area.
Yeah, I guess one issue I've had is our kale patch has got cabbage worms. That's been an ongoing battle for the last few weeks.
Chewing holes in the leaves.
Yeah, so it's a pretty mature, good-sized kale patch that, we left on vacation and came back with all kinds of holy leaves everywhere.
Okay.
What I've done is sprayed with BT.
Yeah.
So you can just get it in a little squirt bottle that you spray on the leaves. And I had plans to get an exclosure over it once I get enough control from that BT that I've knocked them back enough. Now, where I live in Monticello, we did get a little bit of that rain that you got, and I washed off my BT treatment.
Oh, yeah, so now you got to do that again.
So, I feel like I have a few more days of maybe treating with BT and or another maybe week or so that I'm going to kind of watch that. And once I start to get good, healthy leaves coming back, I'm going to prune off some of the, holy leaves and exclude that so I just don't have them anymore. It's probably better than...
Because if I remember right, Kelly, our insect expert's not with us today, so she would probably know the answers. But cabbage worms, they're usually white. The adults are white. That you see them flying around
little white moths.
Yeah, little white moths that fly around the garden. So you put some type of cloth or screening over, then that could prevent the adults from getting in and laying there.
Yeah, once you kind of kill the larva that's on there, that's what the BT's doing. Is all those little caterpillars when they bite the leaf that has BT, it's killing them, and then I don't want any more eggs from the moss, so I'm going to exclude. So
keep them out of there.
And this kale patch has done pretty well.
You've probably already harvested quite a bit from it, right?
Yeah, so probably could write it off for the year, but it's still really healthy. So I've got kind of the Russian red-leafed kale.
Okay.
I'm talking about.
Yeah, I like those just for how they look, even in containers and stuff.
That seems to be what they're hammering.
Yeah.
And then I have the green leaf kale that doesn't have any leaves. Okay. It's kind of just a skinny, tall, narrow leaf. They don't seem to be as favorite.
I don't love that one as much. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
interesting.
So that's the big pest issue.
So you're getting a lot of the cool season stuff planted now. So it's just kind of hard to think about because it's still obviously very hot in August, but soon we're going to have those cooler temperatures coming on, so you can start to get those cool season things you
also
did this spring.
Some spots that have finished up, you can begin to cover crop if that's part of your rotation. So I've got a broccoli area that I've cleared out and I've cover cropped.
Okay.
Nice. I still have a bit of an empty spot where we didn't get some things started this spring. I think that's probably going to wind up being a cover crop.
Sure.
Now, just a little corner. So
better that than just letting the weeds go, right?
Or we've kind of mulched it and weeded it, and just we're probably not going to fill it in with what we have in our rotation for now. So Yeah, that's a great thing to do this time of year. As you get later into fall and you have these empty spots, there's definitely some seeding windows for different cover crops. So you get a little too late. So
well, that's good. Get the ground covered. Okay. Well, we got a question came in from Anne here, wanting to know what's the difference between pruning and trimming, and what are you supposed to do for oakleaf hydrangea? You want to take that? Pruning versus trimming?
Well, I don't know that there is a difference.
Yeah, I think it's just terms. Yeah, same.
Yeah, pruning can be trimming, trimming can be pruning.
I think so too.
I think pruning is maybe a little more horticulturally correct of a term. And when I think of pruning, I think of, making proper cuts at a branch union, or we talked about a node on a herbaceous plant. Where maybe trimming is something you might do with shears on a hedge where you're just indiscriminately cutting. I don't know, but
but basically same.
Basically the same thing. So in the case of oakleaf hydrangea, then let's see, it's flowering now, so it's not a spring flowering shrub.
Nope.
So that's a summer flowering shrub. Yep. So what that tells us is that it is flowered on a bud that it would have. I have to think about this.
I know, I always do too.
It would have.
I think it blooms on new wood.
New wood,
I think.
That's
if I
right.
remember right.
That's right, because it's our spring flowering shrubs that actually bloom on a bud that they produced this year. So next spring, the spring flowering shrubs would have bloomed on a bud that you need to leave on the plant.
Yep.
In the case of oakleaf hydrangea, it's in the spring when growth initiates, then the start of those flower buds, those flower buds initiate. The best time to prune an oakleaf hydrangea then is wintertime. And the reason being, the plant's in dormancy, there's just less impact to the plant processes if you prune during wintertime. And I really recommend kind of late winter. So once we're past the really cold of January, late February, March, before the buds start to swell. So that's the thing you kind of look for.
You don't want to wait too long.
Once buds start to swell, then we're coming out of dormancy and starting to get close to leaf out. So wintertime pruning is best. Now, if you had a spring blooming shrub, then we'd actually prune right after flowering this year. So you wouldn't want to prune in the wintertime with those because you would prune off flower buds.
Yeah, exactly.
That's kind of the story on oakleaf hydrangea.
Yeah.
So
and honestly, Anne, unless it's getting too large or it's like taken over an area, mine are not super old yet. They're maybe 3-4 years old, and I've not pruned them yet just because the size is still manageable. They're still not. So it's not something that you have to prune necessarily unless you're wanting to maybe reduce the size a little bit. So
yeah. And really, if it's just a branch or two that are a problem, you could do that right now. It's just with respect to the health of the plant, the best time is winter. So if you're going to really do a full remove 1/3 of the foliage of the canopy kind of pruning, then you probably want to wait till winter. But if it's just a few snips here and there to kind of shape it, that's not a big deal to do this time of year, and especially on a healthy plant.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, hopefully that helps you, Anne. We always get a lot of questions about hydrangea and when to prune and what to do, and it's all related to, like we were just talking about, when do the buds form. So there's some hydrangea that you'll hear the term they bloom on new wood, which means, like we just talked about, that the flower buds are created in that season. So they're on the new growth that comes out. Those are where the flowers comes from. There's other ones where they bloom on old wood, we call that. So that means some of those may actually need some winter protection, because there's one particular hydrangea, a big leaf hydrangea macrophylla, is a popular hydrangea because it has beautiful pink or blue flowers. People love it. People love them. But, I've lived in my house now for 3 years. There's 2 of these planted in my backyard against the house, so they're kind of protected. I have not gotten a single flower in 3 years. And I imagine the people before me probably didn't either, because I don't know what cultivar it is, but it's probably Endless Summer or one of those. They get killed back so far in winter that all the buds get killed off, and it's a beautiful green shrub, but there's certainly not any flowers. So
I think that's the most common question is why is my hydrangea not flowered? In some cases it can be light.
It could, shady. And that's possible too in my spot as well. But usually what I recommend is maybe don't do a big leaf hydrangea. Maybe do a Annabelle or an Oakleaf or a Panicle. Some of the other ones that are a little bit more reliable.
Yeah, I think Annabelle is probably my favorite.
Me too. Yeah,
it's the one that has the kind of big puff balls,
big white flowers.
Hydrangea arborescens is the scientific name.
Yeah.
Annabelle is the cultivar.
Yep. Very good.
Which actually has an interesting history.
Yeah, you shared an article about that recently. Do you want to share that?
Yeah, sure. That is actually a cultivar of the native Hydrangea arborescens. Mm-hmm. It's native to southern Illinois, and interestingly, around the early 1900s, some folks in southern Illinois were on a horseback ride and saw one of the native type of hydrangea that had a more beautiful flower, and so they were gardeners, took it back to their house in Anna, Illinois, which is, has to do with the name.
Sure.
And planted that in their yard. And a lot of neighbors noticed it, and they distributed that plant. And so within that small town of Anna in southern Illinois, that plant in the early 1900s, was around for a while until actually a horticulturalist right here at U of I caught wind of it. I think that as the story goes, I actually looked up the conference proceedings paper that was published on this back in the late 50s, I think it was, as this variety was developed. He actually saw it up here in central Illinois. Somebody had got one and went down to Anna and collected specimens, and then eventually released it as the Annabelle cultivar. So the difference between it and the native version is that the native version's flower is much smaller, and it's actually two different parts of the flower that we see on the native version, where there's all the flowers in the center that are smaller and less, more insignificant, but have all the nectar and pollen, and the outer flowers are really essentially sterile bracts.
Yeah.
So what these folks did when they found the showy one out in nature was selected for just the bracts and not the pollen and nectar providing part of the flower. So in that case, a cultivar was created, or a nativar, which is probably less valuable to our pollinating insects, but is beautiful
for the landscape. Yeah. So kind of depends what your goal is.
So kind of a neat story that is, right here in Illinois.
That is really cool. Yeah, Anne commented, everyone in Illinois should have at least one Annabelle, and I agree.
I agree.
It's a solid hydrangea to plant for sure. My mom just recently bought a couple. It took her a couple garden centers to find them, so I don't know if they're just kind of sold out for the season so far or what. But
if you are looking for Annabelle, there's been a lot of iterations since it originally came out, so it may be hard to find the true Annabelle. But most of the others look really similar.
They do.
It's just that.
I think I have a Incredible, one of mine is called. It's supposed to look similar but have sturdier stems so that the big flowers kind of. So there's definitely other ones,
Yeah, but definitely a beautiful plant. Great selection of a hydrangea. I guess the only drawback is it gets a little wilty on these hot days.
Yeah,
but
it does.
But if you notice,
once it cools off again, it
kind of comes back
up. Yeah. So. Cool. Okay, well, keep those questions coming into the comments. We have a question from Carrie regarding honeysuckle. She said she noticed yesterday that all the honeysuckle that grows along the edge of her yard looks like it had some disease that's causing yellowing and withering of the leaves. Is this something that could cause problems for my vegetable gardens and berries? I'm okay with the honeysuckle going away. We're slowly working at digging them out. So I imagine she's talking about bush honeysuckle, which is an invasive species that's in many woodland areas.
It's hard to not have it on your property.
Yeah, exactly. And after it has white flowers early in the year, followed by red berries that birds love to spread, which is how it tends to spread. So what do you think? So she's got yellowing and withering of the leaves.
I don't know. I mean, honestly, I've never really seen any type of pathogen impact that plant.
Not either.
Which makes me wonder if it truly is honeysuckle. That would maybe be a first question. And I think the way I kind of identify a honeysuckle is it has leaves that are opposite of each other, so they come off the stem, at the same location on either side.
Sure.
And they're probably about that size, and don't have any lobes, and maybe that it is honeysuckle, but that's maybe a question to look at first, is make sure that you do have the right species of plant. But I don't know of anything that I've ever seen really attack that other than the herbicides we use to kill it.
And that's what I was going to say, is that potentially maybe there was some herbicide got in contact with it. It's hard to...
it's pretty shallow rooted, so smaller ones you can just rip out of the ground, so I don't know... if there's any type of disturbance around it that could have impacted that.
And it has been dry, but I haven't noticed any other honeysuckle having
but
yellowing or anything.
I think the second part of the question was, is it going to be a problem for my vegetable garden? And the answer to that would be no. I don't really think there's anything that could transfer.
Yeah, if it is some type of a disease, I imagine it is going to be only on that honeysuckle. Yeah. And if it is an herbicide drift or something happening there, you might want to kind of look for similar symptoms on other plants.
Another thing is maybe some damage could have just happened to the root flare, the root crown of that shrub. So it may, look down there for maybe where a rabbit's chewed on it, or I don't know what would really want to chew on it there, but just some damage around the base of it can maybe cause that too.
Yeah. So we don't really know for sure on that one, Carrie, but I guess just be glad that the honeysuckle is suffering. And if you do want some help maybe identifying what the issue is, if you are concerned, you could certainly take pictures of it and send it to us, or send it to your local master gardener, your extension office, and they can help you out.
Feel free to post some pictures in the comments, and we'll take a look.
We'll take a look, definitely. Okay, we've got a question from Tiffany. How do I make my tall phlox not look so sad? The leaves seem to burn up quickly in the summer sun and get a variety of diseases, even if you spray with neem oil. Any thoughts? So, garden phlox. One thing I would find out, Tiffany, is what variety you have, if you could, what cultivar. There are many cultivars of garden phlox, of course. Some of them have disease resistance, in particular for mildew. If you have just a straight species of garden phlox, you're bound to get powdery mildew almost every year.
It's kind of a guarantee.
It's almost a guarantee, especially when we have a wet spring like we had.
We had a bad one.
Yeah, we had a bad one. So phlox, just regular phlox, is looking pretty sad right now. But what you can do is you can plant cultivars that have mildew resistance to them. Nancy is one that comes to mind. It's a white garden phlox. There's other ones out there. So that would be the first thing I could do. You could certainly spray a fungicide for that early in the season if you really were kind of... Neem is not going to do any control for powdery mildew, I don't believe, if I remember right. You'd want to use a preventative fungicide. So that could be
I think kind of getting after it early in the season is pretty critical too.
Yeah, and that's the thing about mildews and many of the fungal leaf things, is that you notice the symptoms now or earlier in the season, but once they're started, it's too late to spray the fungicide. You're doing that earlier in the season. So Tiffany, not a lot of help there besides maybe doing a preventative fungicide if you're really concerned about it, or maybe think about swapping out for a different cultivar.
It's a case of you kind of learn from this year and you get ready for next year, I guess is really where you're probably at with it. Yeah,
and you mentioned the leaves burning up quickly in the sun too. They are full sun plants, but it's possible that maybe the site you have is just a very well-drained soil, and maybe it dries out a little faster than maybe some other areas. So you might even consider moving it to an area maybe that holds a little more soil moisture, or that maybe has a little less, a couple hours of sun. That could be an option too. So
you could add a little mulch if you don't have
mulch would help.
Cover.
Yeah. So whatever you can do to keep the soil a little bit more moist, and maybe even try a different cultivar and see how that does. So we voted on next year's perennial plant of the year, and one of them was a phlox. So I'm excited. Yeah. I'm excited to see if it wins. We'll see, because garden phlox, of course, are great.
That's a great one.
Great ones to mix in. Okay, keep those questions coming. We have 15 minutes left. So if you have a gardening question or comment about anything we've chatted about today, feel free to add that into the comment box. So what else is going on in our gardens? So we've been watering, of course. A lot of watering happening.
Yeah, I have some newly planted shrubs from this year and small trees and things that I'm really watching those right now.
Yeah.
And some of them are showing some real bad signs of drought and things.
Are they?
So I've had to constantly move around to sprinkle.
Wilting, yellowing.
Yeah, I've got a couple of hazelnut shrubs that I planted that just are looking terrible right now. And I do admit that I probably got a little lazy with all the spring rain we had through June.
I think everybody did. It's like we didn't need to water.
So I've been doing some jockeying around to sprinklers in different places is how I've been, and some soaker hose. I've used soaker hose.
Yeah.
So I don't know. That's something that I think we don't think about a lot. You plant that shrub in the springtime, and it looks great through June and things. And a lot of times you kind of count it off. Count it as off and going. But
it's good.
Even if they're looking good, you can really do a lot of benefit to that plant by applying some water if it's newly planted, because you're helping get it out of that transplant shock.
Yeah.
And really, if you want to picture it as a plant in a pot, that you've planted. It's in transplant shock until it can get its roots out of that planting hole and a root system spread out so it has a network that can take up that soil moisture.
Yeah. And it's going to take a while for that to happen.
It's going to take a while, and if you're just watering that root ball that you planted, you're not drawing those roots out further. So that's why I took to just a sprinkler in a few areas where instead of my soaker hose that goes along and just kind of waters the ball of the plant, a sprinkler was able to kind of get the whole area doused.
So that's what I've been doing too, just because I've had some areas that are just too big to get with a soaker hose.
And I mean the same thing with any perennials you've divided. Like I have some area I've been continually kind of dividing some hostas and moving them around the last couple of years at my place, and I have a hosta patch that was just kind of added to this year, and it's looking terrible.
Yeah, and I've been waiting because there's a couple hostas that I want to divide before this year's over, and I just keep waiting because I'm like, I could do it now because you can divide a hosta kind of anytime during the growing season. I just know that I'm gonna have to be watering so much when in the new spot that I put these, so I'm kind of holding off a couple more weeks to see if maybe temperatures cool off, maybe get a little bit more rain coming, and then I think I'm going to go ahead and do it.
Yeah, that would be ideal, later in the season. And I actually transplanted these back in May, I think.
Oh, nice.
But, it's kind of the same thing where, boy, they look great through all of June and everything, and I kind of forgot about them, and just was walking by the other day, and they need a drink too. So I'm starting to kind of move hoses around to get stuff to those. But
so keep an eye on everything.
I mean, the nice thing about them is once they establish, I really don't water hosta that much ever.
I don't either. After that first year, once they're onto that next year, they're pretty good. And most perennials are going to be like that. Most smaller perennials like that. Yeah. Okay, we've got a couple questions that have come in. Excellent. Jessica has a question. Any opinions on privet? She recently purchased a house that has a privet hedgerow. She's read that it's invasive to the U.S. Any experience with privet?
There are invasive species of privet. Some more so than others, but it's another one it's the seeds that birds eat that distribute. Honestly, I am not a huge fan of it because it's kind of thorny. I mean, I don't know that it's really truly thorns, as maybe just little tiny twigs that are pokey on it. But it's not, and I don't know. I would also criticize it for not having a great ornamental value other than a visual block.
Yeah, I mean if you're just wanting a solid green block of a shrub, then it could work. Yeah. Yeah,
so to me, not a high value ornamental plant. So I mean if it's performing that function of block a visual screen, maybe it's fine there, but there's other things I maybe recommend. One of my favorites for just a visual screen is arborvitae.
Yeah.
It's evergreen.
Yep.
So I don't know. I guess not a favorite plant of mine.
Yeah. So Jessica, you could certainly keep it if it's there, if it's established. Just keep in mind you're gonna have to shear it. You're gonna have to, if you want it to be a certain size and shape, then that's something you do on a kind of a yearly basis. And like we talked about, it could be invasive. So if you are near a wooded area, a woodland natural area, then that might be something you consider maybe taken out.
Park, a forest preserve district, any place you could be the infection source for a natural area. And you'd probably know if you had a very invasive species because you would have little privets in your beds as a weed coming up. So
so keep an eye out for that. Yeah, and there's lots of other hedge options. We had a team meeting up at Morton Arboretum this spring, actually. Yeah. And they have a very nice display of hedges. I mean, they do. How many species do you think there was?
Oh man, I'll bet there was 30, maybe 50 different types of hedges.
Yeah, so just all different types of hedges. They've planted in rows, and they've sheared some of them so you can see what they all look like.
Yeah, and I mean it is everything in the world you can think of.
I was surprised there were so many options. I didn't even think about that many. So maybe even go to the Morton Arboretum website. I bet they have them all listed on their.
Yeah, I actually spent a lot of time taking pictures of those.
Oh, nice.
interesting things like bald cypress as a hedge.
Who would have?
Who would have thought of that? And really, it's just it's pruning, that creates that.
Yeah, so exactly. You can turn almost anything into a hedge if you have the time and the effort to prune it, right?
It seems, though, that with the bald cypress hedge, it's kind of a maintenance issue.
Yeah.
You're going to have to continually prune it over time, and I don't know if that's the greatest.
Yeah, you should be selective about your species.
But there's a lot of native species of shrub that actually kind of naturally form that hedge for you. That you don't have to necessarily prune. That they fill in from little suckers from their roots. One of my favorites in full sun is an elderberry.
Oh, yeah.
It really gets a nice... it's almost an aggressive plant to contain.
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit of the issue with some of those natives. So, hazelnut, that's some of the reason why I planted the hazelnuts at my house, is to form kind of a border.
Cool.
There's quite a few options if you just want kind of a hedge-forming, thicket-forming kind of plant.
Something that's wouldn't be invasive. So, yeah. Cool. Great question, Jessica. Hope that helps. Aaron's asking here, they have a Bottlebrush Buckeye. That's about 80% of it seems to not produce any leaves this season, and the rest of the leaves look dead. A neighbor's large red maple tree prevents it from getting any sun. Any hope of reviving it?
Well, with 80% gone, I think it's tough. Kind of as a rule of thumb, if you were going to prune a woody plant, you could remove about a third of the foliage safely on a healthy plant. And so that's where I kind of look is as a plant starts to lose more than a third of that foliage, I really start to worry about it. So when you're saying there's only 20% of what was there left, that worries me, and it also makes me think there's probably a reason or another that it's not a great spot for a buckeye.
Yeah.
They can handle quite a bit of shade.
Yeah, I don't think the shade was probably the issue. So I'm guessing it was some other.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of a particular pathogen that's just probably the thing we could point the finger at in that case. So, I don't know. I think I would probably consider replanting something different there.
Yeah, just in case it is some type of pathogen or something that maybe did.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of something that would have a similar shade tolerance and flowering display. Maybe some of our native viburnums, like black haw is one of my favorites.
Yeah, I love any of the viburnums,
Yeah, there's a number of those that tolerate quite a bit of shade and have some flowers. They obviously don't have that neat bottlebrush flower. That is a really neat.
It's going to look different, but...
Interesting flower, but...
Okay. Well, maybe... Hopefully... Unfortunately, probably not too much look to forward on that one, but maybe swap it out for something else.
And you can always wait and see what it does next spring and what leafs out, and there still will be time to see it leaf out and then decide if you want to replant something and
exactly.
have time in the spring before we get to the end of June and all of our rain stops and you're having to water it and nurse it along. So.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, we've got a follow-up from Carrie here. We've got about 5 minutes or so left, so if you've got lingering questions, add them to the comment box there. So Carrie had our honeysuckle question earlier. So she's saying that she said this is multiple plants extending along 200 feet of tree line at the edge of their yard. She said they don't spray herbicides, and they're separated by 50 feet from their neighbor's yard. And she sent us a photo here. Not photo. Never mind. This is the Bottlebrush Buckeye photo.
Oh,
sorry.
Different photo.
So let's look at that one before we go back to
sorry, Carrie. We'll be back to that in a sec.
So, Aaron, that looks pretty far gone, unfortunately. So, there's our answer for Aaron. But back to Carrie. So it's multiple plants, which is interesting. So, it almost would have to be some type of environmental issue, then I would say, or could still potentially be herbicide, depending on where it drifted in from. But my guess would be something environmental. If it's affecting multiple plants and they have similar symptoms, that would be
and of the same species. So a lot of times a herbicide damage would be multiple species.
So if you're not noticing any other similar symptoms on anything nearby, then that would rule that out.
Maybe a stack. It doesn't necessarily rule it out, because there's times where in a pesticide drift situation, one particular plant's cuticle on its leaf, the protective layer, is just thinner than another one, and that's why it maybe settles into one plant in particular. But Yeah, I think probably if I was you, I would just be happy that this invasive species is not doing so good and maybe phase that out.
Yeah, and then just keep an eye on your other plants nearby and see if any other symptoms pop up.
Because I know we talked about privet and its potential invasive character. I mean, honeysuckle is a guaranteed really bad invasive for forested areas, or even the fact that we have a lot of it in our subdivisions and things. That's just a seed source for a bird that can easily fly quite a distance to a natural area and deposit that seed.
For some way.
And I would say among all of the invasives in Illinois, that's the biggest threat to our forests is bush honeysuckle, because it's shade tolerant and can really dominate the understory. And our native trees can't really get any seedlings going when you have an understory of it. So
yeah, it is a real.
So I mean, I think even though we really don't have a great idea what killed it, I think you should be happy, and I think you should think about eliminating that plant species from your property in general. So
yeah. Okay, awesome. Well, you still feel free to send us some pictures in the message if you want to, Carrie, and we can always take a look at them. So we've got about 5 minutes or so left. So if you have any last questions, add them to the comments there. What I'm doing in my garden, I've been watering, of course, but I'm also, so I went to this conference last week and I came home with a whole lot of plants, a whole lot of perennials. So I'm looking at a couple of areas that I want to start some new beds, kind of get things. I have a fence that kind of borders the front of my yard, and I planted dahlias up there this year just because I was out of space and I needed somewhere to put the dahlias. But I'm thinking about starting a couple feet of bed kind of along that fence. So I kind of started that process this weekend, came in, kind of drew the shape out with spray paint, kind of figured out what shape I want to go. That. Yeah, it's kind of fun figuring out.
Well, you can visualize it when you spray paint it.
Exactly. Or so you can also start with like a garden hose and kind of lay it out, and then So that's kind of what I'm working on. I got the edging started, and then in my case, it has turf growing now. It has grass growing. So I could either dig up the sod, which is certainly something I could do, but a lot of work. Well, so what I'm doing in my case is I'm going to use an herbicide to kill the turf, because it's a fairly large area. I'm going to wait until that herbicide residual is gone, and then I can start kind of planting in that area, add some compost, things like that. So that's kind of what I'm looking at, starting some new stuff.
Yeah. So what I've been doing some edging of old beds at my house that were never really edged well. And we just kind of mow up to the mulch.
Yep.
What do you like for an edging?
So I have it's a very small like garden rototiller, kind of electric one, and it has an attachment on it where you can just put a flat blade. So I use that to kind of get my initial cut through the turf. And then honestly, I just do a hand dig, take the shovel and just kind of come at an angle and just dig out.
And then just let your mulch sit right up to the.
Yeah,
I've done that a lot too. That's probably the easiest.
Yeah. In an ideal world, I would put like brick or like something nice along there, but that would take a lot more digging and leveling.
I did some brick around some places. The city of Urbana has some really neat. It's like the old bricks from Broadway Avenue.
Oh, cool.
That you can purchase that I think look really neat, and just in a few spots we did those.
Yeah.
So, I'm always looking for a different material. I like, to me, like either a brick or a rock, like little chunks of rock.
Yeah, I always like that look too. Yeah.
But I'd say the majority of my beds are just like yours, just where it's kind of a hand dug
just a cut
edge. And the only problem with that is maybe every couple of years you need to kind of redo it to clean it up and make it look good.
But it's
but really easy to string trim right against.
Yep.
That your edge, where mine, I've got a brick that my string trimmer's hitting and breaking it.
Gotcha.
And, you can kind of mow close. So it's always a maintenance issue, whatever you do.
It is. Okay, we've got one final question. Derek wants to know, how are Ryan's tomatoes this season?
How are tomatoes?
How are Ryan's tomatoes this season?
Well, we had some tomato disease earlier this year.
Oh, yeah?
And I just had a couple whole plants that I just completely ripped out.
I've had a couple questions lately. People asking because they've got yellow leaves at the bottom and it's kind of working its way up.
Yeah, I think we had early blight, which is soil borne. And I think the mistake I made, and I preach against this all the time, is that we planted our tomato plants and didn't put any mulch down for a little bit.
Yeah.
And so it's that splashing up from the soil that started it. And I tried to get out ahead of it and prune off some of those infected leaves, but it just kind of took over in a couple plants. So those got pulled out. So I don't have as large of a tomato patch, but
you got some stuff.
But yeah, we still have some coming on. We've got just a 1,000 of those little sun gold tomatoes.
Yeah, those produce a lot.
My kids will actually eat. So we did plant quite a few of those.
Nice.
So yeah,
cool.
It's been an okay year for tomatoes. Just that wet spring, I think, really promoted those fungal.
Yeah, I think so too. And you're right. If you didn't do a mulch, then it just splashes onto the foliage and causes.
Yeah, kind of the same thing for my peppers. I think it was such a weird wet spring that I don't have a really great pepper crop coming on. We have some here and there out of our patch, but so
not bad. Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining us today. We had a lot of great questions, good conversation with Ryan and myself here. So we will see you next time. We'll be back on in a couple weeks. So save those gardening questions, and we'll be happy to answer them. Thanks everybody for joining us.